Recording success.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, should we go ahead and call the meeting to order? Kelly? All right. We need a roll call.
Yep, let's do a roll call and we do have a remote attendee. Online. Okay.
Okay.
When I call your jurisdiction, if you'll please state your name. San Mateo County. Atherton.
Rick is on.
Atherton, you're muted.
Sorry, Rick DeGoli.
And Rick is participating remotely from the address listed on the agenda. Belmont. Brisbane, sorry.
Pauline Mackin.
You, Burlingame.
Donna Colson.
You, East Palo Alto. Millbrae. San Bruno.
Marty Medina.
You, Portola Valley.
Jeff Ellis.
Oh, we have a quorum, thank you.
All right, fantastic. So we have an approved teleconference participation, but it's not under AB 2449. It's just a regular one.
Correct.
All right. With that, we're gonna go ahead and open it up to public comment. Are there any members of the public who would wish to comment or speak on an item not on the agenda today?
Doesn't look like we have any raised hands online.
Okay, great. All right, can I have an action to set the agenda and approve the consent agenda items, please?
So moved.
Thank you. Thank you, Pauline. Thank you, Jeff. Roll call vote, please.
San Mateo County. Atherton.
Yes.
Belmont. Brisbane.
Yes.
Burlingame.
Yes.
East Palo Alto. Millbrae. San Bruno.
Yes.
Portola Valley.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion passes.
All right, fantastic. We have, Rick, do you have a chair report that you would like to discuss?
No, the nominating committee is proceeding and I expect that they'll have a recommendation at the next board meeting. I don't have any specific chair report.
Okay, fantastic. CEO report, Sean.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for.
Excuse me,
Yes.
we don't have a report, so that's why we're not gonna have public comment, all right?
Correct. And that item doesn't even require
Okay,
public comment, so
great.
you're good.
Okay. Next slide, please. Good morning. Oh, I have the clicker. Sorry, Rana. These guys are training me to be independent, you know. Okay. So I have just a couple of things to report out on. I think Rafael Reyes is on the line with us today, so he's going to cover a few things. But the first thing that I'm very excited about in our effort to diversify revenue is that we have put our big toe into the water for a federal earmark request. It is a $2 million request that was submitted last week through Senator Butler's office. Today it is going into Senator Padilla's office, along with all of the other representatives who represent us here in our service territory. We have asked for $2 million to support our low-income home upgrade program.
Okay.
It has a 100% match, which of course we are prepared to do. And it is in advance of a lobby trip that Mark and I will be taking along with several other CCAs that you can see there next week in Washington, DC. And this is really, as I say, our first foray into establishing relationships with our Washington, DC offices, with our CCA colleagues, and figuring out what we can do, not only from a funding perspective, but also federal policy perspective. So it's an exciting step forward for us, and we'll see how we go. The next two items are in Rafael's shop. I'll just introduce them briefly, Rafael, and then turn it over to you. We have a letter that will be going out by the end of today to the California Housing and Community Development Department regarding a proposed amendment to their building code related to EV1 charging. And then Rafael will also give us a brief update on local reach codes and how that's going in light of the 9th District ruling regarding the gas ban. So Rafael, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Sean. Director's apologies for my not being there at the office. With regards to these two items, as some of you may be aware, the 2025 state code cycle has begun. That's a lengthy process where state building codes are developed over the course of this year for the most part, and then they take effect in January 2026. But all of the active portion of the development process happens basically now over the next several months with a public process. There are a number of elements that we're tracking on this. This particular item with regards to EV charging pertains to proposal.
15th and 16th, two different congressional districts.
Sorry, I meant to get that.
Relates to proposals from Housing and Community Development affecting existing buildings. And the proposal essentially is any alteration of parking would then trigger a requirement to install level 2 charging. As many of you know, level 2 charging means a 240-volt circuit, typically 40 amps. This we see as strategically a serious problem. Level 1 charging is a significant part of our overall strategy for deploying EV charging. We have hundreds of level 1 charging units already installed and hundreds more in our pipeline. And this is for overnight charging. So specifically and particularly for apartments, we see this as a huge opportunity because of dramatically lower cost. So 1/5, 1/6 the cost of a typical level 2 charger, and substantially less impact on the distribution grid. So requiring fewer service upgrades, transformers and the like, which ultimately gets rate-based, increasing the costs for all customers. And it's also very good for load shaping because it's a little bit of power at any given point in time. So it's very flat load shape as opposed to level 2, which is much spikier. So as a consequence of that proposal, we have been engaged in a number of different directions to submit letters to the Department of Housing and Community Development, and that includes CalCCA and a number of our peer agencies that have signed on to a joint letter. And we have also been in contact with Senator Becker and Assemblymember Berman, who are working on a legislator letter, which is expected to go out today to HCD and the Building Standards Commission, which are also involved. So that's
Hey, Raphael, sorry. I'm going to ask you to accelerate it because we have Rick for literally 30 more minutes.
okay. My apologies.
Thank you.
Then on the REACH codes, as noted, following the Ninth Circuit Court decision declining to rehear the case in relation to Berkeley's so-called natural gas ban, several agencies in our jurisdiction have paused enforcement of REACH codes, including the county, and wanted to alert directors that we do have an alternate model code now available. Atherton has already had a study session on this topic, and other cities are beginning to look at this as well. We do still see continued value in having some form of local REACH code to continue enforcement of all electric construction. And happy to answer questions, of course, offline at any time.
Thanks, Raphael. Any questions? Okay, I've got just a few more things for my. Let's see. Can I have your help, Brianna, going back to slides? There we go. Next slide, please. This is not working for me. There you go. Okay, I'm not going to read all of this because I think you're on the left-hand side. You all are aware that we have a lot going on as per usual, and we have laid out the next 3 months because we have a lot to complete here in the rest of this quarter. Couple things just to point out that would be new is that we plan to kick off our next strategic plan effort sometime over the summer. That will be to cover 2025. Looks like we will probably do a 3-year plan this time, just because it's, when you get too much further out, it gets a little arbitrary in terms of date setting. And then the other is just a heads up, we may cancel the July meeting. We're doing our best to follow suit with what you all do through your council. So unless we have something that requires action in July, we're gonna do our best to give everyone a month without a board meeting. Then the council briefings, I will be in Hillsborough tonight. And then Burlingame in a couple weeks, Pacifica. So we're working to fill out the calendar through the end of the year, Hi, Anders, with the idea that hopefully I will go to every member agency before the year is out. So that concludes my remarks. Unless there are any questions. Okay.
Please.
The newspaper today.
Yes,
Is Donna Superior Live?
Yeah, it's actually,
she's checking it out.
I don't know where the actual.
It's on the front page, I think.
One page.
Oh, wait, wait.
Sorry.
Sorry, we find.
I tried to get an autograph earlier.
right there.
Yeah. If you could just highlight.
Sure. I'll hold it up.
There you go.
So it's not the top headline, but the bottom headline, talking about well, it leads with our member agency energy grants. But the article really, if you read the whole thing, is about the $68 million reinvestment package that the board approved in January. And I think it's, there were a few things that were maybe missed, but for the most part, I think a positive story.
Good job.
Thank you. All right. I think back to you now, Donna. Is there other questions? Thank you.
Anyone else have any other questions? And we can open it up just for a moment to public comment. If there are any public comments. All right, seeing none. We'll go to item number 4, recommendation and approval to approve Peninsula Clean Energy's rate setting methodology. Turn that back over to staff.
This is going to be Nick, our CFO, but I do want to set this up just for a little bit of historical context. You all may remember when Jan was still here, the board was interested in looking at the potential of what we call cost of service rate setting. Nick's going to get into all of that. This is the culmination of fairly long period of analysis, and we had to go back and correct some things. It took a little while to get to this place. And so this is kind of also a shift for us potentially in the way we approach our rate setting. So just so you know, it's a through line from Jan, who kicked it off, to here now, hopefully coming to decision. So with that, I'll turn it over to Nick. Thank you.
Okay, I'll set some context and provide a little more background before I dive into our analysis and discussion of the various rate setting alternatives. As I think you're all aware, PC has historically offered our customers a 5% discount to PG&E generation rates net of the PCIA. That's been a great message for customers. It's easily understandable. It's right on our website, 5% for everyone. It's consistent. It's been that way since the beginning of time for us. And pretty meaningful savings. And it's, like I said, across same number for all customers. So easy to explain. As again, you're all aware, for the first time ever, a couple months ago, we decided not to increase our rates in line with PG&E's rates. And essentially our rates were frozen at 2023 levels for at least the first 6 months of the year. That analysis, importantly, was based on our recently adopted liquidity reserve targets of 180 to 250 days cash on hand, which provided an important indicator for how much of a discount could we provide our customers while maintaining financial stability and enough reserves for any unintended events, surprise events. The result of that rate freeze was a discount for most customers of greater than 10%. The number varied, so that was one of the issues that made it a little harder to communicate. But most customers got, I think it was 12 to 15% discount to PG&E. And obviously, we got a lot of PR benefit for that and a lot of goodwill with our customers. As Sean mentioned, we have been considering adjusting our rate setting methodology to more closely align it with our costs, which has a bunch of benefits I'll get into in a little more detail. Last year, we engaged this firm called NewGen Strategies, which is a leading rate setting consulting firm, to sort of assist us with our analysis. And the recommendation, which I'll go into in a second, is a result of that analysis of NewGen, as well as our strong financial position today, and customers, at least current, and probably always focus on costs. And sort of that's all led us to where we're going forward. So first, let me go through in a little bit of the NewGen analysis. As Sean mentioned, we engaged them last year. It took a little bit of time to work with them, but essentially we, with their help, developed a financial model that we could then use to calculate contribution margins across all of our customer classes. As part of that exercise, and why it took a little longer, was we had to basically allocate all of our costs, fixed, variable, G&A costs, energy costs, across all of our customers. And we had to come up with the various assumptions and methodologies to do that. And so a lot of subjectivity, which I'll get into in a second. Importantly, the results of this analysis were just illustrative. I don't want to get too focused on the actual numbers. They were based on test years 2024 and 2025, but still some important takeaways that helped us shape our recommendation going forward. And as a result of this work and engagement with NewGen, we now have a model that we could use if we so choose, and once we maybe finalize it, to set rates by customer class going forward. Three main takeaways from the work with NewGen. The first one is we realized, and why it took a little longer than we thought, how much subjectivity is required to go through this exercise of essentially unbundling all our costs, classifying the costs, and then allocating them out to various customers. Things like demand charges, fixed costs that aren't easily allocatable across costs, had to make certain judgments. The second takeaway, which we probably knew, but it was helpful to see, was that across most of our customer classes, our rates that we collect from them does exceed the costs. So not surprising, but it was helpful to see the results. And then the third takeaway, which is probably the most impactful and maybe what led to some of our recommendations, is that the contribution margins varied widely across our customer classes. Again, don't want to get too much focused on the numbers, but just as indicative, range from -3% all the way up to 46%.
And just to clarify, by contribution margin, you mean the difference between what the customer is paying to us versus what it actually costs us to provide their service when you unbundle it?
Yes, thank you for clarifying. Yes, exactly.
Do you mind if I ask, like, just broadly speaking, which customer classes pay the most? I mean, like, what's like, who's like?
Somebody answer that?
Sure.
Certain elements of the commercial customer class is broken out.
Yeah.
In more, it's more segmented.
Yeah.
Residential, which is 90% of our customers, are closer, it's just above 10%.
Okay.
So the variance really comes in the commercial load.
Yeah, the big users.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Okay. Thanks.
But it's indicative, and so we, it's very indicative, so we were hesitant to put up a whole bunch
Okay,
of
no, I don't want
bar
to.
charts and stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, sure. Okay, so we're looking at 3 rate setting alternatives. There's probably more than 3, but these are the 3 that we wanted to focus our analysis on. The first one, and I'll go into each one of these in more detail in the next 3 pages. But the first one is basically status quo, maintaining the 5% net discount that we provide our customers to PG&E generation rates. The second alternative is what I call pure cost of service rate setting, similar to what PG&E does, where costs are allocated to each of the customer classes. This is the work we did with NewGen. And the third, which is not really a technical term, we're calling a hybrid, basically has elements of the first 2. And to cut to the punchline, what we're recommending. So the first one is the status quo. We're all aware aware of this. I won't go into too much detail on sort of how it's implemented, but essentially every time PG&E updates their rates, they usually are higher. We go through an exercise, not a huge exercise, where we basically update our PCE rates across the various rate classes. So that customers always, maybe except for a 1 month period, have that 5% discount to PG&E. That's excluding currently right now, or a little bit of an exception for the next 6 months. Several positives to that, and it served us well. As I mentioned before, it's a really positive message. It's easily understandable by our customers, easy to communicate. Basically, PCE rates are always cheaper than PG&E, at least since our founding. The other benefit is it avoids that subjectivity, the arguments that I mentioned of allocating those costs. There's no right or wrong answer for a lot of these decisions, and so it's a lot of subjectivity. PG&E goes through this exercise, and as a data point, phase 2 of the general rate case, which is essentially allocating the cost, takes many months, is highly contentious. Obviously, every customer class is going to be arguing to allocate less costs to them. So a lot of subjectivity and debates. And the third benefit, and it's not really a reason to do it, but it's easy to implement. When PG&E increases their rates, we go through an exercise of increasing ours or decreasing if that's the case. However, there are several considerations, or I guess you call negatives, that are leading us to potentially move away from this. The first one, as CFO, is the most concerning to me, in that our revenues and rates are really set with no connection to our costs. You know, most companies, you figure out how much it costs to produce a product or provide a service, and then you would set the price of that product or service to cover your costs. That's not the case here. Our revenues really have no correlation to our costs, which is really scary. And it can result in two outcomes. The first one is you could have a situation where our revenues are insufficient to cover our costs. And that actually happened twice in our history. It was not a huge impact and we were able to manage through, but you could envision a situation where it could put the entire agency at risk, where revenues are significantly below costs.
But I have to point out that we have made a commitment as a board that we would raise our costs to cover an extended or protracted downturn.
Revenues.
More
We would
recently-
raise our
More
pricing.
recently, we just did that.
We would raise our pricing if we needed to.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that is because I don't want the public to have a sense that somehow our organization could go or would go bankrupt. I think we all made the commitment that we would up the
Yeah.
fees for service in
I think
order
that was
to cover-
policy 18.
Yeah, a negative, right?
Yes, and he's gonna talk about that.
Okay, sorry to interrupt, Nick.
And I think it deserves to be said, just to be completely clear, that in the 2 years, I think it was 2020 and 20, fiscal year 20 and 21, it was COVID time. The board was wanting to be sensitive to the customers to maintain that 5% discount, and made the decision then to go into our healthy reserves.
Yeah.
To accommodate that. So that was a conscious decision, perfectly fine. I think the biggest takeaway that Nick is pointing out here is that there isn't an exercise that has been going on where you tie your rate setting to your actual costs and your needs to cover your costs. We've
Right.
chased PG&E with a true allegiance to the 5%, but every once in a while that's been out of line.
Right.
So, sorry to interrupt.
No, please, this is meant to be a discussion, so I appreciate the interrupting.
Mhm.
It's not interrupting at all. The other situation which you could have, which we had most recently last year and part of this year, is rates could potentially be higher than necessary, resulting in increased reserves, which we've had, and potentially lost savings to customers. Again, the board allocated those excess funds back to customers over the subsequent period, but it did result in an exercise we had to go through.
Can I point out one other thing too?
Sure.
So this excessive bottom point, which says here, increased in financial reserves and lost savings for customers. But we've taken those funds and reinvested them into programs that have benefited our customers. So if we were running just a very, say, like a 3% margin on our business, that would be fine. The sole program we would have would be basically providing energy at the cheapest rate we can. We wouldn't have any additional capital to do any of the programs that we do.
But the point is also, we've dedicated a good amount to benefit our fair care customers as a result of the financial reserve that we're able to build up. So
Yeah, that's right.
that further help most needed ratepayers at a time of beginning of us.
That's right.
So that's also an extremely benefit for the local provide ratepayers.
Well, to our lowest income ratepayers, because they are subsidized by our higher income ratepayers.
So would we actually continue on this PG&E minus 5%? And I bring this up because when I talk to our residents about PCE saves you money, they go, okay. It baffles me that it doesn't even seem significant to them. So whether it's 5% or 2%, as long as we say we always offer a discount, I don't know that we should be locking ourselves into saying 5%.
And to your point, Colleen, there's evidence across CCAs that the percentage, unless it's pretty significant,
Right,
doesn't make a huge
No.
net difference in terms of opt-out
Right.
rate.
right.
It doesn't, but we do find ourselves, as all of you know, in a period right now where people are super price sensitive.
Mhm.
And for all good reason. So it's really, this is a place and time where it's appropriate to really be thinking about this, and I'm gonna not steal your thunder, keep going.
Keep going.
We're gonna
sorry.
get
Yeah.
there.
No, I mean,
But I'm making notes of things to amend here to kind of just clean up some of the language,
Yeah,
because I think it's important for folks to know that that money has gone back out the door in support of our communities and our customers, which is why there's an article about that today. We'll move on to the next.
Sure. Cost of service rate making, which includes allocating our costs across customers, essentially involves an exercise, which sort of what we went through with New Gen, although that was very indicative. So we would have to really sharpen our pencils, where you determine all the costs as for the agency and then allocate those across customers. And then importantly, set rates based on the cost to provide that service. So the resulting discount to PG&E or premium would vary across customers, because some customers it may cost more to serve them than others. There are several benefits of this approach. The first one is rates or revenue and rates would be set on a forecasted basis to always recover our costs, which would lead to hopefully financial stability, would be viewed positively by rating agencies, by counterparties. The other main benefit is there could be years when our rates are significantly less than PG&E. So the discount is greater than the 5% that you described, maybe 10, or currently, as I mentioned, we're up to 15%. Another benefit of this approach is that it's theoretically the most equitable. We would be determining how much it costs to provide service to a certain customer and allocating and determining rates just to cover those costs. The important caveat here that it is assumed proper cost allocation, because you're making a lot of judgments on what it costs to service that customer. And the final benefit is we're really not beholden to PG&E rates. Right now, we sit around, we monitor PG&E rates, they go up, they go down, and we react. Here, we would almost have no connection at all to PG&E rates for good or for bad. The considerations here, you could call them negatives, is, as I mentioned, there's a lot of subjectivity involved in doing that cost allocation. There's no right or wrong answer. You're using judgment. It could be contagious. Again, every customer class is going to argue that the cost to serve them is it should be lower. The other important consideration here is if you go through this approach, and our peers who do this experience this, there could be times when PCE rates are higher than PG&E's. Obviously, we would do everything we could to control our costs, manage our costs. That didn't happen. But here you are not beholden to PG&E rates at all. So you could have a situation where certain customers are paying more than PG&E. The third consideration here, which is another important for communication, is the discount or premium will vary by customer class. Through this analysis, you could have some customers who are getting using the examples, a 15% discount to PG&E. Others maybe a 5%, others a premium. Not necessarily a negative aspect, but just makes the communication and the value proposition a little harder to communicate to customers. There wouldn't be one number that we could highlight on our website or in marketing material. Sorry. The third approach, which again, we're calling hybrid, not really technical, we think takes some of the benefits of each approach and sort of melds them. And here, this one's a little more confusing, so I'll take a few seconds to maybe describe what it is. But what we would be doing here, what this approach involves is, first you would be determining, or we would be determining the cost for the entire agency, not by customer class, but for how much does it cost to provide service to all of our customers. And I'll make up a number. It's not totally made up. It's close, but just to, but sometimes it's helpful to use actual figures. Say that number is $400 million. We would then calculate how much revenue we need to collect to cover our costs and maybe some sort of appropriate financial reserve. Say that again, I'm just going to make up numbers, $401 million. So 1 million more than 400 in this example. We would say that's how much revenue we need to collect from all of our customers. Then what we would do would go through an exercise where we would look at PG&E rates, and we would basically, I want to say reverse engineer, sort of, you can almost say like Excel, do a solver equation to calculate how much of a discount can we what's the maximum discount that we can offer our customers to collect that 401 million of revenue. So the answer could be 12.5%, or 7.2%. And the idea would be we would be able to offer the most discount, so maybe it's more than 5% ideally, to customers to collect that $401 million of revenue in that example. The first three benefits of this are same as the cost of service. Revenue is always greater than cost, at least on a forecast basis, financial stability and health. And as I said, the discount could be greater than the 5% we currently offer customers. There are two other important benefits which we think are important and why we're recommending this approach. One is it avoids the potential contention of allocating across customer classes. And it's also easier to implement than sort of the pure cost of service rate making when you're going through that sort of complex modeling exercise. And then the final benefit is consistency of message. Again, there would just be one number, one discount provided to all customers, no complaints. Well, why are they getting more of a discount? Why am I paying more than them relative to PG&E? Considerations, the first one is similar to the cost of service. Just a caveat, there could be times, ideally not, when our rates are higher than PG&E's. So just something to consider, same as cost of service. And the other consideration, not really negative, but just a reminder that the cost allocation here would be based on PG&E's. So something to consider, assuming it's correct or closely correct, but we wouldn't go through our own exercise.
All right, questions, everyone?
We did a little benchmarking. It's always helpful to see what others are doing, not that it makes it right or wrong. And unfortunately, there's no clear winner, I guess you could call. Our peers used all three approaches. The first one, PG&E minus, we're calling, that's what we do. So you could put our logo there on the left, is used by two of our peers. The pure cost of service has recently been implemented by two of our peers. CPA is the largest CCA down in LA, and 3CE recently implemented it. And then there's the hybrid approach, where you can see is utilized by several of our at least local peers, Sonoma, MCE, and Silicon Valley Clean Energy. I talked to a lot of the CFOs of these CCAs to understand their perspective, their pros and cons. And on the hybrid approach, it's interesting when you talk to at least to the CFOs, they mention that there are times, MCE's had several times in their history where their rates have been higher than PG&E's. But it's allowed them to get the A rating from the rating agencies, it's provided financial stability, and it's allowed them to build the financial reserve.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, sure.
Can you give us, and this may be hard to do, can you give us an idea? What kind of discipline would this entail? Are you looking then at examining rates every single month? How often could that change? I'm sure you've looked at that.
Great question. So what we would propose doing would be to go through our budgeting exercise, which we are actually just kicked off last week, where we would determine what are the estimated costs for the agency over the next, we forecast 5 years, but the real focus would be on the current upcoming fiscal year. And we would use that forecast of cost to set rates every July, August time period. And so it would be set for ideally a 12-month period. We know customers don't like a lot of variability in their rates. We would monitor costs throughout the year, and we'd obviously monitor PG&E's rate decisions. But in a perfect world, rates would be set from, say, August to August of the fiscal year.
It's good.
So one argument in the past we've had for maintaining PG&E minus, as it's noted here, was to avoid confusion among, our customers about when to, time of use in particular, like that we wanted to be consistent so that they weren't trying to like save money with us if there's going to cost them more money with PG&E's T&D. Like if we didn't want those costs. But the question maybe is more general. I mean, our costs obviously are very time dependent through the year, through the day. And so would we come up with sort of a time of use or something that would, we might decide that the best way the time we really want to charge the most is at 7 o'clock at night, for example, because that's when it costs us the most to get that extra power. Just because it's, how much does this give us that flexibility? Does it become sort of a burden to do that? I'm just curious how that's.
For the PG&E minus or the hybrid, or both the PG&E minus and the hybrid, which essentially are PG&E minus. The first one's PG&E minus 5%, the other one's PG&E minus X, whatever we determine. We would not have different rate setting methodologies, approaches than PG&E. So that could be a good thing or a negative thing.
Yeah.
In the cost of service, one of the considerations was you would have to go through that exercise and what sort of behaviors do we want to incentivize? How do we want to set our time of use? What is that period? Could be a worthwhile exercise, but obviously a lot more analysis and considerations.
And then the other question is PG&E obviously has sort of gotten rate adjustments for over collection and under collection. I guess it's just a comment. We would, if we misjudged our consumption for a year, we might under collect and have to go back and we'd have to decide whether we were going to go back and try to recoup costs if we were to lose money. By the same version, we'd be making a decision to give money back in some way if we over collected for a year. Okay.
Yeah, the thought process would be we would monitor costs throughout the year. So your forecasts are just that, forecasts, both usage as well as our costs. And if there was significant deviation, and I talked to MCE about this, they ideally don't want to change rates, but there have been times in their history where they have had to make rate change sort of inter-year because of different actual results than forecasted.
And we've done that. We have done that. We've made the decision to lose money for 2 years. We made the decision to give the $68 million back. So it's not that different. I'm just thinking through the consequences.
What we're really talking about here is utility minus with a better analysis and attachment to our budget. And thus more also, I think, having to really dial it in and have more discipline around our budgeting.
Yep.
So that we reduce a lot of the budget variance. So one of the thoughts that we had is that we're recommending the hybrid approach right now because it's also like sort of getting the discipline going around a new methodology. This is essentially what we did in January to determine.
Yeah.
And then if we do this for a couple of seasons, couple of years, if it makes sense to fully divorce from PG&E, because that's essentially what you do with true cost of service.
Yes.
It has no relationship to how PG&E has allocated their costs. It also makes it impossible for a customer to do any comparison.
Yeah.
Because you've now completely left that sort of apples to apples type opportunity. So it's, for us, we feel the right way to go as a step. Let's see how it goes. And if the tides turn and we want to go to full cost of service in a couple of years, if that makes sense, then that would be something you would bring up.
Sorry, just wanted to point out that Rick is.
Oh, Rick.
Rick,
He's got to leave soon.
Yeah, I've got to leave soon, but let me give a couple comments. I think the hybrid model is the right model. And in addition to what staff has said, there's another reason, which is it gives us flexibility. So for example, Jeff's comment about maybe we want to change our time of day structure to increase rates significantly at 7 PM because we've got a problem between 7 and 9 PM. If we're tied to PG&E rates, like we have been with the minus strategy, we really don't do that. But I think we have the legal right to do that. We can set rates any way we want. And I think we should have that flexibility. And when we look at the behavior of our customers and the needs of the grid, I think that's something we should assess. That's, for me, that's the principal reason that I support the hybrid. It gives us some flexibility, and I don't think we need to incur the costs of going into doing a full, cost rate analysis, because PG&E has done that. And while they may not, their analysis may not be as good as we could come up with, I think that the difference is relatively small, and it's going to be very expensive to do that cost analysis every single year. So I think the hybrid model is the right one. My second comment is, our customers are focused on costs. Every single time we do an analysis, it's cost that matters to them. Well, we only control some of the costs, and in fact, it's based on the PG&E rates, it's 1/3 of the electricity costs that they bear, because 2/3 is from distribution and transmission, and we're going to have no control over that. So the PG&E rate model is going to impact our customers whether we stick to it or we vary from it. It's going to affect them because 2/3 of their electricity bills are tied to it. So I think I just as soon rely on that cost assessment that PG&E does, with the ability to make adjustments, which we legally have, and which we would be formally implementing with the hybrid model. The final thing that I'll say is, while we have used our, increased revenue beyond our direct costs to benefit our customers with the whole series of programs that we're implementing, and I strongly support those, we can't ignore the fact that really customers aren't so focused on those programs. They're focused on their costs. Every time we ask them, that's what they come back to us with. And redirecting the agency to be customer focused necessitates that we never forget that. And I think the hybrid model gives us the flexibility to make those decisions, and that's why I support it.
Okay. Do you need further?
So the action is, if you want.
And sorry, I've got to leave.
no.
I'm
Thank
gonna
you,
be late
Rick.
for my
Okay, take off.
plane, but I gotta go.
Take care.
Sean, may I ask just a question, which is, as we begin to fill out our portfolio of procured energy,
Mhm.
and we get closer and closer to sort of matching does it become easier and easier to price our?
In terms of doing our own cost allocation,
Yes.
potentially, but I also think potentially not, right? Because there's always going to be some deviation in terms of whether it's time of use, demand charges, go
Well,
ahead.
even if we're 100% procured, we're still gonna have days where we're short because
That's right.
demand spikes.
And we're gonna have.
And we
days
lose
that
a
we're
lot of
long,
money in those
and we're
days.
days
So
that
we-
we're short.
Yeah, so we're gonna have to come up with a way to account for that and hopefully discourage use during those times. There's some combination of preventing use, but also being prepared to pay the extra, like one day could be several $1,000,000
Yeah, yeah.
if we're cut short, so.
The other
That's
thing is
complicated.
that there is a legal issue here that we've not been engaged in, so it's not highlighted here, but the PG&E cost allocation has been generally accepted in a court of law.
Mhm.
They've gone through, our friends on the Central Coast went through a lawsuit called the Boyd case. There they look at sort of reasonable costs, and the utility minus model held up in that case. So this is why at this time too, we feel like it could be, we could put ourselves sort of at statutory risk,
Yeah.
legal risk, moving all the way to the cost of service, setting our own cost allocation. It's very subjective and potentially opens us up, whereas because of and you've been through this many times, phase two.
Yeah.
Rate cases and all of that, it's more legally accepted. So
Yeah.
it's trying to thread the needle. And then we can always revisit in a couple of years if we feel we're there.
Okay, we'll open it up for members of the public that might have any comment to make or questions.
We do have one member of the public. I am getting ready to share his comments.
Written comment?
Brian? You are muted, but if you could unmute and.
Hi, hopefully folks can hear me.
Yes.
Hi, good morning, Brian Schmidt from Menlo Spark. Really interesting discussion, and I can definitely understand the importance of considering the cost of services. Menlo Spark is working on the climate transition, extremely important to us, and one aspect of that is focusing on getting an equitable transition, addressing the needs of the low income and underserved communities. One thing I would really like to see in this analysis is how does it affect that equitable transition? In particular, the PG&E minus has created a situation under certain circumstances, like recently, where there's some extra revenue that could be used and has been used for enabling that transition for low income and underserved communities. So my suggestion would be, as the board considers what to do next, look at each of the different options and considers how that can affect that equitable transition, the lowest income communities. And doing that, it might want to look at something that might be considered maybe PG minus, but with some changes, maybe to reflect some of the flexibility for incentives that Rick discussed, like having some extra charges at different times. And maybe some flexibility if 5% is collecting too much, some flexibility in that discount rate, but still keeping the discount. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Appreciate the comment. Yeah, I think that a lot of our programs and a lot of our pricing has benefited our care and FARA people, and most of our programs do too. I have to be honest with you, I'm hearing a lot of commentary from middle class people who are also being really stretched and feeling like they also need, yeah. So I'm not sure that our organization is set up to be a social welfare agency. I think we're set up to be an energy provider, and that we have to do it in the context of being fair to all of our people, because money that we get, that we distribute out to other areas, it's all a zero-sum game for us. So it is basically meaning that some people will be paying higher rates in order to subsidize other people paying lower rates. So I think that's always, we just always have to kind of keep that framework in mind as we always, look into it.
Yeah, to your point a moment ago, I think, first of all, in terms of this whole rate setting discussion, I think to a large degree, we're already in this hybrid mode. Kind of based on policy that we have existing. We're at a PG&E minus program currently with the directives that if rates needs to go higher just to balance costs, we will do so. We make that decision as directive as a board. And to the point that Donna made a moment ago, being able to continue to use this current hybrid approach gives us the flexibility when the economy continues to change and shift. We can help those ratepayers who need it the most at the time and to the degree that when they needed it, that we have that flexibility to do so when we're able to build up the reserve that is needed so that we can help those folks when the time is needed. So I think that's the angle at which I try to look at how to mold that hybrid approach a bit, in a sense that gives us the most flexibility so that we can achieve those goals. At the same time, that 5% minus message has resonated so well that it benefits us more to maintain that easy, simple, beneficial message to our ratepayers. It's important. Going back to try to reinvent the wheel in a way, to do the cost of service with cost recovery and all the other analysis. Not sure the current way is as beneficial. I guess we have to weigh the cost and benefit of that exercise. Knowing it is what it's beneficial, but implementing it need to be